Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's Hammer Conversation with Robert Thurman and Sharon Salzberg. As you might imagine, I'm really thrilled to have these extraordinary guests here tonight. Sharon Salzberg is a world-renowned meditation teacher and author who's played a crucial role in bringing Asian meditation practices to the West. Sharon first encountered Buddhism in 1967 in an Asian philosophy course at SUNY Buffalo, and her growing interest in Buddhism led her to move to India for several years, engaged in intensive study with highly respected teachers. She then returned to the United States in 1974 and began teaching Vipassana insight meditation. In 1976, together with Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield, she established the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, which now ranks as one of the most prominent and active meditation centers in the Western world. In 1989, they expanded their vision, founding the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. In 2005, she participated in the groundbreaking Investigating the Mind conference in Washington, D.C., along with the Dalai Lama and leading scientists. She also organized the meditation teaching for the 2005 Mind and Life Summer Institute, which was an intensive 5-day meeting to advance research on the intersection of meditation and the cognitive and behavioral sciences. She's addressed audiences at the State of the World Forum, the Peacemakers Conference, and has delivered keynotes at the Sacred Circles Conference and Tricycles Buddhism in America Conference, and many others. Her work is featured in various anthologies on spirituality, including Meetings with Remarkable Women, A Complete Guide to Buddhist America, Handbook of the Heart, The Best Guide to Meditation, and How to Stop the Next War Now, Effective Responses to Violence and Terrorism. Her teaching and writing communicate the power of meditation to overcome personal suffering to a worldwide audience of practitioners, and she still manages to lead non-sectarian meditation study retreats for practitioners from widely diverse backgrounds. The ancient Buddhist practices of Vipassana and Metta, loving kindness, are the foundations of her work. Robert Thurman is recognized around the world as a leading authority on religion and spirituality, Asian history, philosophy, Tibetan Buddhism, and the Dalai Lama. As a very young man, he traveled around Europe, Turkey, Iran, India, and Tibet on a spiritual quest. Eventually, he learned Tibetan and studied Buddhism. He first met the Dalai Lama in India when he was just 21 years old, and later, in 1964, when he decided to become a Buddhist monk, he was ordained by the Dalai Lama himself. Upon returning to the United States, he earned a master's degree and a PhD at Harvard and became a professor of religion and Sanskrit. And Thurman is now the J. Tsongkhapa Professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies in the Department of Religion at Columbia University. He's also the president of the Tibet House U.S., a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Tibetan civilization, and he is the president of the American Institute of Buddhist Studies, which is a nonprofit dedicated to the publication of translations of important texts from the Tibetan Tengir. He's the author of many books on Tibet, Buddhism, art, politics, and culture, including The Central Philosophy of Tibet, Circling the Sacred Mountain, Essential Tibetan Buddhism, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Wisdom and Compassion, The Sacred Art of Tibet, Inner Revolution, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Real Happiness, Why the Dalai Lama Matters, and most recently, he co-authored with Sharon Salzberg, Love Your Enemies, How to Break the Anger Habit and Be a Whole Lot Happier. So before I bring Professor Thurman and Sharon Salzberg out, I want to introduce Dr. Sue Smalley. Dr. Smalley is a professor emeritus from the UCLA Department of Psychiatry, where she did research in neurobiology before founding the rather amazing and unique Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA, which is inside the Semel Institute for Neuroscience. Sue is not only a scientist, but also a writer, and perhaps most importantly these days, an activist. She was the instigator of the mindful awareness sessions we have here at the Hammer Museum, for which I am eternally grateful. She's been a huge supporter of the work we do here, and she's a champion for women suffering around the world, and also for meditation as a path to peace. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sue Smalley.
I'm really happy to be here, though, to add a personal note to Claudia's introduction. These two people, Bob and Sharon, have played a major role in connecting practices of inward investigation with outward action and social change in the world. And they've each influenced my life and work because of it. Bob's book, Inner Revolution, was an inspiration for me personally in imagining what the world would be like if it were created by people dedicated to practices of looking inward, using things like meditation and mindfulness. And it was a major impetus for my founding of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA that Claudia mentioned is a co-sponsor of tonight's event. Sharon's also been a steady influence for me as well, and I know for many of you here tonight, because of her gifted way of teaching loving kindness. Just the other day, I sat with Sharon and a dear friend of mine paralyzed by Lou Gehrig's disease. Sharon said so little, but her presence of acceptance and kindness infused us with a profound sense of love and happiness, despite the horror of this devastating illness. Both Bob and Sharon care about bringing these practices to the public, and it's with their new book, Love Your Enemies, that we see a very needed application in the 21st century, where self-loathing, anger, violence, and war still seem to permeate the world. So please join me now in welcoming Sharon and Robert.
Hello, how wonderful to see you all. It's tremendous to be here. I always say how much I love LA, which is true. I love the light, I always say. And sometimes people understand what I'm saying, what I'm talking about, and sometimes they don't, actually. But I do love the light. So, Bob and I just saw each other this afternoon for the first time in a while. Bob's been in India, and so he's got... Are you jet-lagged?
No, I'm confused. I'm not really sure quite where I am, but I'm happy to be here too. Beautiful days, several beautiful days.
Yeah. And
Good friends.
we did this book together, as was in the introduction, because we've been teaching this particular topic together for some time. Bob and I are old friends. I helped establish the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, which is in central Massachusetts. And Bob at the time was a professor of Buddhist studies in Amherst, which is about 45 minutes away. And so we kind of found each other. And as is often in his introduction, I couldn't quite hear. He actually is a personal friend of the Dalai Lama's. And sometimes I talk about 1979 when Bob brought the Dalai Lama to Amherst to give a lecture, and we, in our innocence at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, also invited the Dalai Lama, thinking, he'll never come. And then he came. So that was part of the relationship with Bob. So is it true, Bob, that when he came to your house in Amherst, he opened the closet doors?
He did. That was at a later trip, actually.
Okay.
And he came in a surprising visit. He came several times to Amherst while I was there. And one time we had wanted to invite him to our home. And the secretaries, as usual, said, oh, no, it won't be possible. And then we were suddenly notified he would be coming in half an hour or something. And he wanted to come. And so he came. So we stuffed things in closets and we tried to straighten things out. We had 4 children. And he went around, he was looking at this, and then finally he found one closet that was really loaded. And he opened the door, and stuff all just came tumbling out. And he was delighted, it made his day. He said, oh, he said, untidy, untidy. He was really excited about that. He's very funny, very normal. He behaves very normally in normal circumstances, which is one thing I love about him. He doesn't act all high and mighty and all holy and anything, not at all.
That's great. So and then Bob moved on to New York City to teach at Columbia University. And after some years, even though I still live in Barre, Mass., I still vote in Massachusetts, so I say that's my home. I started spending chunks of time in New York City, and so we got to be together some more and began teaching together, even though we're from two different traditions, although both Buddhist. We share so much.
How different are they?
Not so different.
Yes.
Language is different. Languaging is different. So we started teaching this workshop, which at the time was called Working with Your Enemies. And I want to ask you actually about the word enemies in just a moment, because as the workshop evolved into the book went through about, 10 different titles, including the one just before, which was Love Your Enemies, It Will Drive Them Crazy. And then the It Will Drive Them Crazy got dropped, and it became what it is. But what I found actually is that people often protest the word enemy to me. I thought that people would protest the word love. And we can get to that in a moment. But that's what I thought, because so much of my own work has been in teaching loving kindness meditation or talking about compassion. And so many times I've been confronted with people saying that they associate that with some kind of weakness or foolishness, lack of discernment, lack of strength. And I really thought the challenge would be around that word. But instead, so far, of course, there's all of you tonight, so and we will talk more about that anyway, the word love. But many people have protested the word enemies. Like when we were in D.C. that time together, and somebody didn't like the word, and it sounds too harsh and absolute, like you're already setting up a problem by using that word. And I just often say that it seems to be almost like the standard translation. But what does an enemy mean?
Well, an enemy, I think everybody unfortunately knows what enemy means. And I've had a few people questioning that in the sense of saying that if you really have love, then you have no enemies. And I get out of that by saying that you may not think of them as an enemy, but they will think of you as an enemy, and they will harm you. Enemy is defined as someone who harms you, and who wants to harm you, and who all too often succeeds in harming you. And therefore you rationally fear an enemy. And many people think you have to preemptively be an enemy yourself to an enemy. But Buddha and Jesus didn't think so. And they thought that you should love your enemies, actually, and they did say it in various occasions. And we took the title, I think, because it's the challenge, It is. And Sharon was surprised that it's the enemy that they're worried about, because she was afraid people would feel, well, how can I love my enemy? And that means I'm going to be a doormat, I'm going to be trampled on by them, that I'm going to be taken advantage of, and so on, and that's just masochistic, right? That's what you were afraid of.
Right, exactly.
And I guess Jesus was afraid of that too a little bit, but he insisted himself to say that. Good rabbi that he was. A good altruistic rabbi that he was. But from the Buddhist point of view, love means to wish the happiness of the beloved. Of course, they are aware that love can have that possessive, lustful, passionate meaning also. In those languages, it also does. But the high meaning of love in this case means to wish the happiness of the beloved. Now, the reason that someone would be your enemy, they say, is that they think that they can't be happy without getting rid of you or without hurting you. So one makes an enemy of someone who stands in the way of one's own happiness. Like, this town is not big enough for the both of us, So I'll only be happy when you're done in, then I'm your enemy, sort of idea, right? So loving your enemy is actually sensible from a Buddhist point of view, because if they're already happy, why are they going to bother to be an enemy of yours? Being an enemy is boring. Like, it's not like having a jacuzzi bath or something, It's like, you have to get armed, and you have to get strap-on armor, and it's so very uncomfortable, and you're frightened yourself, and then beating someone is a painful thing. You hurt your fist or your hand or whatever, you get tired. And so if you're already happy, you're not going to bother to go out and be the enemy of someone, because that person is not in the way of your happiness, right? So that makes very good sense. So if you love them, be my enemy, and therefore don't be my enemy, be happy, and don't bother to be my enemy, I think. That's what it's saying. If we want to say it's practical, people, I mean, I was worried about that because we were worried that people would feel it was very impractical. Because in the West, because of Jesus' example, according to the way the Romans made Jesus, made the story, changed around the story to blame the poor Jews instead of themselves, who were the ones who did Jesus in, actually, were the Romans. And so I remember growing up and not being happy to see the Lord, the nice guy, little baby Jesus, when I was little. And there he was, like, up there on that cross. I didn't like it. And when I saw pictures of the resurrected, then I was happy. He was cheerful, he was happy, he was like, you can't kill love, that means to me. And so that's a little bit, I think, the Buddhist view of it, something like that. And I did learn belatedly as a comparative religion scholar that it was the Romans, after Constantine and following, that made a big fuss about Jesus being killed, and they blamed the Jews for it, which then has, as we know, a long and very, very unhappy history. I recommend to anyone, not to promote a book, another one, I recommend to anyone James Carroll's wonderful book called Constantine's Sword, The Church and the Jews, in case any of you have never heard of it. It's really revelatory, right?
Well, we took the word enemy in a classical Tibetan Buddhist context, which is 4 kinds of enemies. The outer enemy, which Bob was just referring to, which is someone who seeks to harm us or has harmed us, or somebody who's hurting somebody else, a threat in some way. And then there are the inner enemies, which are states not from the sheer feeling of them, but from being overwhelmed by them, being defined by them, and especially being driven by them into action, so that they determine our choices and the things we do and the things we refrain from doing. Some states are serving like enemies because they bring us so much pain. They bring us so much suffering. It's not that they're bad or terrible, or we're bad or terrible people for feeling them or even being overcome by them, but it's such a path to suffering that we might go down again and again and again. And so those states, and I think it's important to emphasize, it's not the feeling of them, it's when they really overwhelm us, they serve as enemies to us. And then there's the secret enemy.
Yeah, but let's stick on the inner enemy at first a
let's
little
stay
bit
there.
in the dialogue, because you're especially good at that. Your mindfulness thing is really, really particularly good at that. Can you tell us a little more how mindfulness a little bit demobilizes, let's say, the inner enemy?
Well, first of all, I think it's both a challenge and a tremendous thing to know what we're feeling. Actually, to know what we're feeling when we're feeling it. Because more often than not, say that irritation or that anger is coming up, and before we even know what we're grappling with, we're off at the computer and we type out the email and we press send. And I often talk about it's a very funny phrase, but it's like the old days of email, when it was first beginning. If you were on a platform like AOL and you wrote this nasty, hostile email to somebody who was also on AOL, there was this magic button you could press on your computer that said unsend. And it's like something would reach out from your computer to theirs and bring it back. I once actually unsent an email to somebody. It wasn't nasty and hostile, but I thought better of it. And she wrote me right away, and she said, "The strangest thing just happened. I was looking at my screen, and there was an email from you, and it just disappeared." And I wrote back, and I said, "That is so weird. I mean, what is that, But life doesn't give us that many unsend buttons. So the first real benefit of mindfulness is actually knowing what we're feeling as it's beginning, not after 15 consequential actions that we may regret. And then we try to have a more balanced relationship with the feeling so we can learn from it. We can learn about it. If something comes up and right away we're completely overcome. Like, I'm such an angry person and I always will be. There's not going to be enough space for learning. And at the same time, if we hate it and we fear it and we freak out, like, oh no, I've been meditating for almost 40 years or more than 40 years. How can I still be feeling this? I'm so terrible. Look how much money I spent in psychotherapy just recently. You know, it's all been a waste. I'm still feeling this. It shouldn't be here. There's also not going to be a lot of learning going on. So it's really that place in between. We're not sucked in and we're not hating what we're going through, where we can say, this is what's happening right now. And then we can investigate. We can really go to the heart of it. Maybe in desire we find a lot of loneliness. Maybe in anger we find a lot of helplessness, right?
Yes, weakness, or feeling of weakness.
Yeah, and so, and we always see change. We see constant change, even if something comes up with a bang, if it's really strong. So that feeling itself becomes the vehicle for a lot of insight and understanding.
Yeah. So that's really, Sharon, is so, we've been so, actually sometimes I jokingly say, but it isn't really so joking, that we make a good pair, mindful and mindless. And and meaning by that, we're getting to the secret enemy, and the secret, the next level down that we go using this framework, Indian and Tibetan framework. And the next level down is the level of the, what we call the intrinsic identity habit, or the self-identity habit, where we have this self-image of ourselves on a conscious level. On an unconscious level, we have a kind of very rigid feeling. You know that when you see a picture of yourself in a scene a long time back, and you couldn't, not too long, even a year or two, and then you see a scene happening and you're in the scene, and then you remember the scene, and then you're back there in your memory in it. And then there's a point in your witness consciousness, you could say, where you feel you were just the same then and you're just the same now. You have kind of a way of connecting these two events, these two times, as if you were unchanged in these two times, that the witness point in your consciousness never changes. And you know what I mean? Can you find that a little bit? It's like you're always the same. And if you suddenly weren't sure which person was I there, you'd be a little freaked out. But actually, you completely changed from any period of time in the past, because we always change all the time. And so that illusion of a fixed self-identity relates on the unconscious level to what they call the unconscious intrinsic identity habit. The feeling that there's a core to the self. It isn't only the ego, it's an exaggeration of the ego. It's a core of the self that is unchanged and therefore, in a way, absolute, not relational, not related, because anything that relates has to change, and that's the real us. And then that place is like the handle, is the way that I like to explain it or think about it. Not that I completely understand it, but I'm still trying. The Buddhist psychologists, I think, do very well with it. It's like a handle, so that when you have a powerful emotion, like anger as being the most obvious one, fury, when it's expressed fury, you become like an absolute. And therefore you forget that, like your relative knuckle, it breaks if you punch the wall. Your relative friend breaks if you're too harsh and unpleasant to them. And you start becoming very clumsy and awkward in relating to things, because this emotion takes a hold of you by the handle of your rigid self-identity, and it slams you against a lot of relative things in a clumsy manner. And that's why we cause so much damage when we're angry. We overreact. There are so many psychological studies. The degree or quality of our judgment about what we're doing becomes completely lessened, like 80%, et cetera. And it backfires on us, and we get blowback, as they call it nowadays in political terms. And we harm people we like, and we harm ourselves. And sometimes we temporarily clear away an obstruction, but almost inevitably it makes the situation worse, because other people remember it and they come after us. And it's just endless. It's an endless cycle. And that's why the Buddha and Jesus said, hatred will not put into hatred, and only love will. And love can only come when we have a feeling of relief from that rigid self, and that is where pleasure and love come from, where happiness come from, And true love can only come from happiness. You can't really love someone in the true sense of wishing them to be happy if you have no idea what is happy. If you're as miserable as I am, which I'm supposed to be, you know, the Protestant ethic says, be miserable or you're in deep trouble. And admit it, face it. If you have someone you live with and they come home someday and they say, I'm so happy. I mean, when you say, how are you? And they say, I'm fine, and you're cool. That's right. Oh, fine. Oh, I'm really fine. They say what it says. But if someone comes and says, I'm really happy, you say, why? And they say, I don't know why. I just really feel happy. Then you're going to say, what did you take? What's wrong? Are you going to have a crash? And they get upset with you. Or you get upset with them. So then love means wishing the other person to be happy, but do we really wish each other to be happy? Do we allow that to each other? In California, maybe you're a bit better than we are in New York.
You have to remember where we are.
I know. I'm used to being in New York. Everybody nods when you say that in New York. No, we're not happy. But now, Sharon, you said you come a little to New York, but you are the New York Lama, mindfulness Lama. Sharon is so tremendous. She's always teaches free at Tibet House in New York. It isn't even an inside place. So, you know, it's a Tibetan place, but although they do inside. And they do when Sharon is there, they do. And she's really wonderful in that she's not stayed up in the nirvana of Barre, Massachusetts, where people go for these long retreats and they have to chase them away with a broom to get them to leave because they get so happy. But she's all over New York City. New York City. Yeah, and we love it, and we don't want you going away, actually.
Thank you. I'm not going away.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Good, except for these terrible book tours that you're doing. So then the super secret one, now you're good. That's the secret enemy. Anyway, secret enemy is when you discover that at your core, you are a relationship. You are just totally interrelated to everyone else. There's nothing there that is not interconnected with others. You know, so yourself is a constant negotiation. It's a work in progress. And it's free to be what you make of it, therefore. You're not rigidly bad, or you're not rigidly great, and you're not rigidly this, or rigidly that. You're a live being that changes all the time, right? And so that's there, but then the thing is, what's even underneath that rigid thing? And that's, again, Sharon, this is your strength. What is that? What is that? Tell the story about Dalai Lama.
Before I get to that.
Oh, okay.
Another way of seeing this, and actually I use the image you used all the time, of the consequence of understanding that there is no absolute, separate, isolated self. That doesn't mean that we enter this kind of nihilistic blur. Whereas somebody once said, and people say it all the time in various forms, but somebody once said to me, well, if there's no self, and he randomly pointed to someone else in the room, he said, how come she's not paying my taxes? You know, so it's not like that. But what we can discover is that we actually live in an interrelated universe. So actually, just being here right now, we can do my favorite reflection for a few moments.
Good idea.
If you just see who comes to mind in terms of anybody who might have played some role in your being here in this room right now. Like, just see who comes to mind. Somebody gave you a book. Maybe somebody's taking care of things at home right now, so you can be here. Or maybe long ago, somebody gave you a book or read you a poem or told you about this place, told you about their meditation practice. Just see who comes to mind. Because I would bet that none of you were probably just walking down the street, since this is LA, and looked at people coming in here and thought, I'm going to go in there, right? We're all here, every single one of us, as a consequence of relationships, interactions, conversations, connections. This moment in time is like a confluence of all of that coming together. And so is every moment in time. So when we think about being here right now, we're also here in connection to all of those beings who have played some role. It's like we exist not only as ourselves, as individuals, because we do, but also almost like part of a network, part of this greater fabric of life. When I do this reflection sometimes and I think about, somebody told me this really dated me the other day, I think about the Board of Regents of the state of New York, which gave me a scholarship, which is how I was able to go to college, which is how I was able to go to India. I went through college. I went to India to learn meditation. Because that's a part of why I'm here right now, too. So many beings are part of this moment in time. And that's our life. That's the nature of life. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about that lack of a rigid, absolute self, it's not that we disappear, but we enter a much deeper understanding of this world of connection. And the heart's response to that is what we call loving kindness, which is not necessarily liking somebody. It's certainly not necessarily approving of everybody or anybody even, but it's the deep, deep knowing our lives all have something to do with one another, and that therefore everybody counts, everybody matters. We may not bring them home, we may not give them all our money or any money, we may not say yes, but we know our lives have something to do with one another. So the example I commonly use, I heard from Bob, and I always give him credit, which is, he says, imagine you're on a subway and these Martians come and they zap the subway car so that those of you who are in the subway car are going to be together forever. He says, what do? If somebody's hungry, feed them. If somebody's freaking out, you try to calm them down. Not because you necessarily like them, but because you're going to be together forever. So guess what? So sometimes when I use that, I use it, I think, much more than Bob even does. I then tell this other story as part of it. I was flying to Tucson some years ago to go hear the Dalai Lama give a series of talks, but I was going early because I was going to give a talk myself. And I ended up sitting in a New York City airport on the airplane on the tarmac for about 4.5 hours. What, looking back, I sometimes call the breakdown of civilization, where it was getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and people were getting angrier and angrier and screaming and yelling, "Get me off this airplane." And at one point, the pilot sort of took command. He got on the PA system and he said, "No one is getting off this aircraft." And I wasn't feeling that chipper myself, you know. I was like, I couldn't reach the people in Tucson who were supposed to pick me up, so I was kind of worried about them. And then I was thinking, I'm paying rent in New York City. That's not cheap. If I could only get off the airplane, I could try again tomorrow. But I couldn't get off the airplane. And then that image of Bob's that I had used so often came up in my mind. Imagine you're on a subway and these Martians come and they zap the subway car so that you're going to be together forever. So I looked around the airplane and I thought, maybe these are my people. And it was so interesting because something actually shifted, which was more in the nature of realizing that a good deal of my ire had actually come from, how long am I going to be stuck with you? And it was like, forever. Okay, deal. Right? Our lives have something to do with one another, and so that's the consequence of that realization. So then the super secret enemy sometimes is talked about as self-preoccupation, this kind of compulsive self-preoccupation, which is different than loving yourself or caring about yourself or having compassion for yourself. It's really, it's like this tremendous block. You know, the way, there's this beautiful line from the Dalai Lama who seems to be with us here tonight in some way, because Bob just saw him maybe, where the Dalai Lama says, I've never met anyone I consider a stranger. I've never met anyone I consider a stranger. You think about that, and how any of us might more normally meet a stranger where we hardly even notice them. It's more like, what do you think about me? Do you like me? Do you like me more than you've ever liked anyone you've ever met before? Oh no, I said something stupid. You hate me. I better leave. And so, I mean, there's a route to loneliness, isn't it? Because we hardly even take in anybody else. So sometimes self-preoccupation in that sense is talked about as this super secret enemy, and sometimes actually a sense almost like a kind of self-loathing that can fuel so much hopelessness, really.
I like what you made me think of was one thing I love. I wasn't there. It's something that's in an interview that someone did with the Dalai Lama, a long time ago, actually. And I was reading the interview. It's a book with interviews with various other famous people. And at the end of the interview, when the main questions have been asked by that person, and as I said, I wasn't there, but you can just see them sort of, microphones are being put down, people are relaxing, and it's about to end, and she asked the Dalai Lama, she says, oh, Your Holiness, who do you think on this planet do you consider your spiritual peers? It's that the cream of the cream question, So he thinks, she said, she's properly reported that he thinks for a minute. He looks up and he says, everyone is my spiritual peer. I'm not different from anybody else. Everyone has a spiritual heart, Everyone has some kind of whatever, holiness, I'm not the holiness particularly. I mean, for the Tibetans, he has a certain position, and et cetera. He's an icon for them in a certain way. And he has become so for me, I can certainly say, from having been a fellow classmate, if you will, slightly naughty. He remains a little naughty now and then. He likes to do naughty things. Sometimes, especially if you try to push him to say one thing, he'll say the opposite. He does. He shocks people, like on Park Avenue, everybody's wearing pinstripe suits. They ask him, who does he really like in the world? And he says, Gandhi, and they all look happy. And then he says, Mao. And then all the capitalists look really freaked. He says, well, he says, I'm a Marxist, he then says. And life is not for money. Money you can't just live for money. You have to live for money. It can be helpful in life, but it can be an obstacle too, And he likes to be a contrary, in other words, and which I love about him. Yeah, I was just with him last week, and talking about addiction, and there are a bunch of neuroscientists there, and they're studying all the dopamine. When you get in with them, you start, and they have all these pictures of the brain, You can't even reach for a glass of water without thinking, oh, my dopamine is going out. The dopamine wants me to have the water. I know. These little diagrams, these little things going bloop, 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 coming out of these brain centers. The dopamine is jumping, And the Dalai Lama is trying to tell them, what about the mind? Isn't there some mind that makes the brain do these things? And that they don't want to admit the mind in there as a causal agent. Or rather, they do, kind of, because these are the ones who go and talk to the Dalai Lama. So they do want to admit that the mind might be a causal agent of the brain, actually. And there might be a spirit and a mind that is not capturable as a material or a coarse material entity, gross material entity. But then they look nervously at each other, and they don't want to not be allowed to go to their next professional meeting or consider that they're over the hill and should retire because they're beginning to find ghosts in the machine. And so Dalai Lama is just very gentle the way he teases them. Kind of, come on now, a little bit of spirit in there, whatever. How does that fit in your experiment? He goes like that. But he loves talking to them, of course. It's lots of fun. But of course, the big addiction is self-addiction. What you were saying, self-preoccupation. In that conference, it was irresistible to talk about self-addiction. People are addicted to themselves. But then, what does it mean to be addicted to yourself? Okay, if the self is a substance that gets abused, what it means is is that it gives you a false rush and then drops you in a worse place. Right? Isn't that the nature of addiction? Addiction, we must remember that anger, for example, or we're talking about anger.
Yeah, well, then hence
Anger,
the subtitle.
You know, and I don't think the neuroscientists quite meant, they didn't want to, they said, oh, somebody wrote a book about alcoholism saying alcoholism, a love affair. You know, it was trying to show the self-medicating aspect of people who get hooked on alcohol, you know, that there's something that they're unsatisfied about in life and that they get a kind of rush out of this thing, but then it destroys them because it leaves them worse off, you know. But so does hatred. You get a rush out of hatred and anger. It gives you like a feeling that you're there. And then, however, it puts you in a complete, it ruins your health, it releases all this cortisol in your bloodstream, and it's just really, not to mention how it ruins your relationships with everybody. Everybody hates you, they can't stand you, you know. And in the Buddhist method, we talk about that here, with the Buddhist tools. And I want to say one thing, that, you know, we're Buddhists, sort of. People ask me sometimes, are you a Buddhist? I think Sharon is a real Buddhist. I always say, wanna be, you know, trying to be, like working at it. And so then they get a little upset if they like Buddhism, because then they think he's been at it for 50 years and he hasn't gotten there yet. And so then there are ways of trying to cheer them up over that. But the point is that we follow Dalai Lama very strongly, that nobody should be a Buddhist who isn't, naturally so. Everyone should follow grandma's religion, because otherwise grandma will be upset. And she'll be angry at your guru, who like converted you to something else. But the point is, we can learn from each other's religions. And they have different psychologies, they have different tools, they have different outlooks, worldviews, and they can enrich their own by looking at aspects of the other, right? But then use that within the cultural matrix of their own tradition, you know, and that way, Dalai Lama doesn't like it, the idea some people have that there will only be one world religion someday. He doesn't like that idea. He says, that's like you go to the supermarket and there's only one kind of toothpaste. It's too boring, you know. There are different flavors for different people, you know. And so what we're trying to present here in this Love Your Enemies, and therefore we took a phrase that Jesus made more famous, actually. Although Buddha did say the same thing 500 years earlier. And it's probably safer to say in India, where they were a little more relaxed maybe than the Middle East. As we know, they tend to be a little less relaxed in the desert there. And we've noticed, you know. And so we took that phrase because it doesn't belong to Buddhism, what we're trying to help people with, right? I decided recently, I mean, it's just a phrase, but religions are service industries. And they offer services to people. And that's what Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and all of them did. Even the gods offer services, or they fail to, you know. And the problem gets when people freak out. I think an old friend of yours, Sam Harris, freaks out and thinks all the trouble on the planet was ever created by religion, which sort of not noticing about Stalin and Hitler and a few other weirdos. But that's when religions think they own their adherents rather than they are the servants of their adherents. You know, imagine a service industry that thinks it owns its customers. How would they be treating them? I don't think they'd be successful, because they wouldn't treat them well. I think there would be slave owning. You know, that's useless, right? Don't you think? Mm-hmm. So I was interested. You connected self-preoccupation because you know that's my big confusion. Mm-hmm. You know, in some Tibetan texts, the self-habit, which is not a moralistic thing, it's like the self-identity habit. It's a wiring thing. It's a miswiring in the software of the animal, not just the human. But the human is less so than other animals, actually. They're more rigid in their sense of more hardwired. The virtue of the human in the Buddhist thing is that the human is completely rewirable. Well, we've all noticed they're very dewirable humans. There's a few of them in elected office nowadays. And they're very rewirable by education, which is why education is so important. So that habit is put as the root of the self-obsession or self-addiction or self-preoccupation or self-cherishing or selfishness. But sometimes selfishness is put at the root of the self-habit. And I get very confused how to really understand that. But you took it in connection to self-preoccupation at a deeper level as self-loathing and connected to self-loathing.
Yeah.
Because why? You're preoccupied with yourself because you're loathing? Because you feel insecure or something? Is that the reason?
I think it could
Is
go
that how you
that
see
way.
it?
I'm not sure the causal condition is only in one direction. I mean,
Okay.
maybe it's
Okay.
we're so self-preoccupied, and that leads to so much unhappiness. And
Yes.
because of all that unhappiness,
Yes.
we then don't remember how to get happy again.
Yes.
And so we just kind of spiral
Yes.
in disliking our situation, hating ourselves for how unhappy we feel, but
Yes.
sometimes thinking we don't deserve happiness, which is another big problem.
That's the self-loathing thing.
You know, it's just this kind of spiral. And I think at the core of it is a kind of hopelessness that comes,
Despair.
which is despair, exactly. And that
Super secret.
and that is why having a sense of a path, I think, is the most important thing of all. We may not feel we're wildly successful in transforming our problems, but we have to know that it's possible step by step, and that we have to be able to take just one more step. It doesn't have to be the end, and it won't be very likely, but it's okay right now. There's something I can do. There's some way I can be. There's some difference I can make in how I relate. Not in terms of what I'm feeling. You know, it's not like saying, well, I'm going to wipe out this and only have that, but it's how am I relating to what's going on right now, and using that, the power of that different relationship to really make for a different life. And that's why I think it's so important to understand that something like love or loving kindness, which is the more common translation, is not a weakness. You know, it's not going to leave you bereft of strength and just kind of hanging out there and letting people hurt you or letting other people be oppressed or hurt. It's not like that. It actually is. It's a force. It's a tremendous strength. And we know that if we recollect somebody who's really been there for us and just didn't have so many strings attached, and there wasn't such a set of conditions like, I will love you as long as you love me in return, as long as the following 15 conditions are met. And I will love myself as long as I never make a mistake. You know, we know the fragility, the breakability of that kind of situation, and that's not all that we're capable of. We're actually capable of so much more. And so beginning with ourselves, actually, even though it's the super secret enemy, you know, beginning with ourselves, I think there really is a path, and we can follow it.
That's great. Yes, the thing that I think, although you said initially that we come from different traditions, in the sense of the Burmese Theravada tradition and the Indo-Tibetan Mahayana tradition, which I've always felt very strongly, and I think His Holiness does too nowadays. He's much, you know, he always talks about being a son of Nalanda University, which was the great Indian Buddhist university in India for the during the whole first millennium, when the Europeans were having the Dark Ages. There was a brilliant, luminous university in North India. There were a number of them, actually. Tens of thousands of monk and nun students, and some lay people. And I always feel that the Tibetans feel that they are the kind of sacred conservators of the knowledge of those universities, because they're one thing that maybe you're not so happy to hear if you're fond of Buddhism is that in Buddhism you have to learn something as well as meditate on something. If you don't learn something first and unlearn a number of things first, if you just meditate, you might meditate on the wrong things. You know, we've had already the experience in the short history of Buddhism in America of someone who meditates a lot, and then they jump up after many years of meditating and they say, Eureka, I'm the greatest. I'm enlightened. Do whatever I say. Bring me a Rolls Royce. And they start acting more egotistical than the ordinary person. And this is because they didn't learn about the super secret enemy, the secret enemy, the inner enemy. They didn't learn about dislodging through reasoning, through scientific investigation, about the incoherence of being an absolute fixed ego self within a relational being and in a relational world. They didn't really, that's something you can learn. You have to understand that with critical wisdom, with critical thinking. But what I wanted to say was that the deepest level of despair that we feel, that Thoreau mentioned, 150 years ago, 170 years ago, massive men today lead lives of quiet desperation. I think we have it in there somewhere. Is what Buddha discovered in all the traditions. In the Theravada tradition, the Four Noble Truths, suffering, its cause of this isolated sense of self, suffering, the frustration of self-preoccupied person. If you've noticed, whenever you have a really good time, what do you say? It blew me away, you say. But what does blow away mean? Blow away doesn't mean you got destroyed or you don't exist. What it meant is, for the time being, you stop worrying about what you were doing. You stop worrying about whether this was the right symphony, the right lecture, the right seat in the place, the right car, the right whatever, the right relationship, the right weather. You stop worrying about all the bookings and arrangements, and whatever it was, it overwhelmed your normal concern about what deal it is for you, and you just grooved. And when did it stop? When did you stop having a good time? When you stopped to think, how good was it? And the minute you do that, it isn't good enough, right? Oh, it was better before. Oh, maybe it would be better with someone else. Oh, well, whatever. It's empty. It completely, the minute you're evaluating what you're experiencing, you can't get blown away. So that's why the suffering, because that self, that it's only there for itself and getting what it's worried about getting something for itself, will never be satisfied. Mm-hmm. But then Buddha's real discovery is the third noble truth. That's reality, nirvana. But only difference of Theravada, and he says clearly in Theravada too, that's the only thing that's real. The suffering is less real. It's only relatively real. And the truth will out over the falsehood. It's a false reality in a way. It's what he said about the suffering and the ego and everything. And the real reality is nirvana. That's why he was happy, because every being will find the truth sooner. But the stubborn ones, like myself, will take a long time, and they'll keep banging their head against this and that thing because they won't open up to the obvious. They won't hear when out of the mouths of babes, and particularly out of the mouths of wives. They won't hear the truth when it hits them. They'll not ignore it. So the reason that these people had the courage to say, love your enemies, that we are proposing this to the world today, and we are working, we don't pretend that we can perfectly do that either, we are working for that, is that we somehow have a confidence, although actually you may have attained nirvana, Sharon, but I certainly didn't. Not yet. I mean, little corner, but nothing. But we feel that it's there. And that confidence means that love is what true attunement to reality. So love is the truth, in other words. In other words, hatred is a falsehood. It's not real. Love is what is real. Because the ground of reality is love. Because it's just like infinite, they call it the clear light of the void. Voidness, the famous Buddhist voidness or selflessness, is not nothingness. Some older translations used to translate it like that. They used to say nothingness, but that's a mistranslation because they have a word for nothingness in Sanskrit and Tibetan and Chinese and every language, and it is not emptiness. Emptiness and voidness is not nothingness. So therefore they call it the clear light of the void, which means infinite energy of the vacuum state or something like that. The state of freedom has infinite energy. And so there's a confidence that if you trust yourself to the world and you love even the enemy, much not to speak of your friends, which sometimes can also be difficult, you are aligned with the truth, whether you know that, whether you are sure of that or not. But just by doing that, you're in line with the truth. What is the famous phrase?
Which one?
Buddha is as Buddha does.
Buddha is as Buddha does. Well, I think we have to stop and open this discussion up to all of you.
I wanted to ask if there's nothing constant as an identity in us, and mindfulness is about being the observer and observing things. How do we not identify with that? If
That's for you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, some of the
I'm just mindless. It's simple for me.
some of the problem we have, of course, is language and the way we express things, and we use conventional language because it's conventional, and that's the right thing to do. You don't want to try to say things in some obscure fashion, like. The conventional thing to say is we observe, we're the observer, or we're cultivating the witness, but actually that's a little too reified. It's a little too solid. More accurately, probably we're cultivating witnessing. It's a process, and rather than an entity. But we just talk like normal people, and. One can over-identify with that witnessing. One can over-identify with anything. And that's why we have a sense of continually growing and changing and being caught and starting over and being caught and starting over and being caught and starting over. And the things that catch us, or the ways that we fall into confusion, may get more refined over time and more subtle, but I personally think that process, and I'm not enlightened really at all, and nor do I know if I should call myself a Buddhist. I actually go back and forth about that, and it's been 40 years, so I think that's the movement of transformation. It's starting over, it's beginning again, it's being lost, being overwhelmed, being confused, and realizing, I can start over. I can actually begin again. Nothing's been ruined. So I think that's what we do, and that's what we do eventually with that identification with the observer.
I think there's a meditation Tibetan tradition about how you meditate on selflessness, and in that one, it's very surprising to people that it doesn't mean sort of getting a blank state in your mind at all. What it means is you precisely remember a time when you were very full of yourself. And they think the best time is when you feel innocent, injured innocence. You're in a state of injured innocence because you've been falsely accused by someone. And in this case, you are righteous and they are wrong. Sometimes you're accused by someone and you really did it, and that's not helpful. It's when you're innocent and then they still and you remember a time like that, and it's best when it's someone who you're emotionally hooked up with, and because then you're more wounded. That they would think I did such a thing, type of thing, and then you're supposed to remember that, and then the observer is in the memory is yourself now remembering, right? But you're supposed to take that observer and make it a hidden, like a spy witness, like spying on yourself in the memory so that you can re-feel all the feelings you felt in the memory. And then when you do, you know how when you're righteous, but you're not yet indignant, you're just righteous. And then you feel, when you're indignant, you're starting to explode, and then you'll be mad in a little while. But when you're just righteous and injured innocence, you get almost like choked up feeling inside. It's like something solid inside. It's like the real you that is so pure and innocent is being sullied by this accusation. And then you just, the observer, you try to make a tiny fraction of your awareness the observer, and you mainly feel the emotion. And then when you learn to really do that, you get a feeling of what is the really solid self that I subconsciously, instinctively in my gut feel that is me, that is the source of all my suffering, actually. And then you can begin to examine whether it's really there or not. Do you follow me? In other words, to understand a negation like selflessness, you have to have an idea of what is the habitual self. So the tradition has taken, your question is very good, and it has a lot of different ways of, the psychological tradition, not religious, of dealing with this thing about the observer in internal matters, and it's very tricky. And when you come to close to some real feelings, there will be experiences of sort of disappearing, which will be frightening. But the way of getting through them is realizing that I can't disappear because I'm not here. In other words, one Lama I know made that really beautifully, explained it. He said that we're so used to being imprisoned in a cage of an absolute self-identity that when we get to the brink of seeing through it and realizing our relativity, it takes our relative self-identity away with it for a moment. And then its last ditch gasp is to have a feeling of disappearing. And I can't tell you how many quote unquote enlightened people run around saying, oh yeah, I'm enlightened because I had that experience and I disappeared. Big deal. Everybody disappears every night. They fall asleep. Your lights go off, you go like clink, clunk, you disappear. And if that was enlightenment, we're all enlightened. Until you have a dream, then you reappear, But we disappear all the time. That's not enlightenment. It's like that person, like the modern scientists. I'm sorry, I have to rag on the modern scientists. I apologize. The modern scientists, the materialists, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, I bet UCLA, they will tell you, yeah, we know you don't have a mind. It's just your brain. And when you die, you're nothing. We got it covered. We know that. We discovered that. And you go, oh, you have a white coat? Yeah, okay. In the lab, you discovered it. But then you have to realize this is someone who's looking for something, and then everything they keep taking apart, and then they all dissolve under analysis, and then they think, Eureka, I found nothing. But actually, they just didn't find what they were looking for. And you don't find nothing, it isn't there. That's what it means, isn't it? So who is going to assure you that you're going to be nothing? On what basis? Of what discovery? It's, it's a little bit psycho. Just a little. Oh, I found nothing. I want a Nobel Prize. All those people with their souls, all those churches, religions, and minds, and spirit, oh, they're all cuckoo. We know there's nothing. How did they know that? They all discovered nothing? Give me a break.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize.
I think there's somebody there.
That's very mean of me. I told you I was unenlightened.
Yeah, I have a question, actually, something I heard the Dalai Lama say once when people asked him why he was willing not to fight for Tibet, for the physical Tibet. And he said something like, well, I carried the geography within me. And I was thinking about that when you said, like in the Tibetan tradition, that they really are carrying the spiritual values of the earliest universities. So I've been puzzling over this issue of geography and being Tibetan and being, isolated from the country, and what all that means to him, how he deals with that.
Actually, I'll let Bob answer in a minute, but I think he does fight for Tibet all of the time. I think we tend to have a particular notion of strength and challenge and holding our ground and insisting, and it's a pretty confused notion. And even happiness, I think we tend to get quite confused about, and either we think we don't deserve it, or it's just superficial, or it's like being lazy, it's like being happy-go-lucky. But when we actually look to be forceful, to be committed in an ongoing way, to sustain an effort, takes a sense of inner resource, right? We need some resiliency as we go up and down, whether it's in a personal relationship, trying to help, or it's in with an institution or on a global level. If we feel depleted, overcome, embittered, exhausted, there's not going to be a lot of wherewithal to keep going. And so I'm impressed constantly by people like the Dalai Lama because of that wherewithal. It's like, how do you fight for 50 years? And how do you be clear about what's going to work and what's not going to work, and not get lost in just outrage, because there is a kind of satisfaction, for sure, to the outrage. And maybe we need it a lot to wake up, but I don't think perpetual outrage for 50 years is actually going to be that sustainable in terms of action. So I find his strength really kind of extraordinary. He doesn't fight in the way, we might think would be more satisfying, like call them some names or hit or, try to bring them down, like try to cause some real tremendous suffering over there. It's a very different thing. It's one of the things I really liked a lot about one of Bob's previous books, Why the Dalai Lama Matters, because it was such an example of let's think differently and find a win-win situation. So,
Yeah, that's his one. But you answered great. What do
thank you.
That's-
Well, you're the
that's a
Tibetan
perfect
guru.
answer. That's a perfect answer. That, people think nonviolence is not forceful, but it is. It's the most forceful. Violence is less forceful, less effective. It temporarily seems to flatten the situation, but then it comes back worse, But the nonviolence, people tell me, they say to me all the time, they say, oh, look at that stupid nonviolence. What's it got the Tibetans and the Dalai Lama all this 60 years, actually? What's it gotten to them since the Chinese invasion in 1950? And then, I say, well, how's Afghanistan doing? How did the U.S. do in Vietnam? How's any violent thing happened? Given the post-nuclear weapon technology and the technology of every kind of technology, that, in a way, it's like the Buddha mind, the genius, the human genius, because every human being has a Buddha mind, has a Manjushri mind, which is a genius mind. The scientists have genius minds. They have a little psycho problem about nothingness, because they're afraid of the church. They were rebelling against the dark Catholics, burning Giordano Bruno, and I don't blame them for that. I'd rather be a nihilist than be burned at the stake, for sure. But the point is, they have brilliant minds, and they have developed all this stuff that has taken all of us human beings, and we are now in a physical environment where we cannot ignore each other. We cannot kill each other. Everyone has like a gun wired to their temple, and everybody else has a hold of the trigger. And we think we can thrive while they starve in Africa. We can be happy while the 1.5 million blacks are in every prison around here, because we won't let them have decent schools and preschool. We can make a great time, and they'll all die over there, and we'll be just fine. Because we won that war and we beat them up. Something we cannot. And we see everything that happens on the planet. The internet, they're relentless. Those Facebook people, they're all over it. And people hope they have compassion fatigue, but they don't, because the nerve gets rawer and rawer. And then you just try to pretend, oh, I don't care what happens over there. And then you feel really uneasy on your, you lock your 4 gates and your high security and look in your TV camera. And you sit home and you're all safe in there, but you turn on the news and then there's Bill O'Reilly or somebody, and you're in a total panic. And you can't have a good time. And we've been physically, the Western people thought they were going physically out and they'd get away from all that soul crap and all that thing. And then we're all physically tied together, where if there's one hell on earth, we're all there. And we can't even have a piece of steak without thinking about the feedlots and the mass slaughter and egg and the chickens. And now they're going to shoot you if you go and take a picture of their chicken thing. They say you're a terrorist, and you are a terrorist, because we're all terrified of everything. And therefore, we're forced to attain enlightenment and take responsibility for other people. Right? Am I right? I know, it's crazy. We have to love each other. It's like Jesus and Buddha. Thank you, Facebook. Thank you, like Google. How did they come up with that word? Anyway, Google. Buddha and Jesus are looking through the Google eyes there. And everybody knows everything. And they can't get away from it.
Well,
Isn't it true?
oh my God.
Here we are on the subway. You know, the bodhisattva, the thing about the subway is about the bodhisattva mind, you know, that, you know, here we are, we're all together here. You can leave, but you can never go away. Because next life, you're going to be my mother, or I'm going to be yours. You know, that multiple life, I love, you know, my guru, I really want to know, yes, I love the Dalai Lama, and I love Thich Nhat Hanh, but my real guru is Bill Murray. Bill Murray taught us baby steps. Don't say, I'm going to go meditate for a month and I'm going to be enlightened. And then when it doesn't, then when you get tired, you say, it didn't work. Like some of you people, like Sharon has some great stories about people that marry. It's not it, it's you. And, you know, just do a little bit at a time. Just take 5 minutes and just get a little less mad when auntie so-and-so like spoils your souffle or something like that. Just a little less, you know. And just bit by bit, baby steps, you know. That. What about Bob? It wasn't about me. What About Bob was a movie built. Did you all see it? He goes around, he carries his goldfish in a little plastic bag. And what baby steps. And then Groundhog Day. If you don't get your life right, if you don't fulfill your mission of being a joyful jewel of a blissful human being living in California, like you have like 10 steps of advantage on your kid. You got Jerry Brown up there. You know, what was it? Who made the joke when Bill Clinton said he never inhaled, and then somebody said, oh, Johnny Carson, I think I know that dates me. Johnny Carson said, well, Jerry Brown, he never exhaled. That's so cool. But he did, and he's like doing the right things, you know, single payer medical, everything. You know, you people are lucky, so you should be joyful. And if you don't do it right, it's like Groundhog Day. You're going to be back. You're going to be there. It's all over again.
I think
It's gonna
Claudia's
What
one more
was the
question.
I'm sorry.
Claudia is saying one more question. Is that
Okay,
right?
Claudia.
Okay, one more question.
I love Claudia. Claudia
I love
arranged
Claudia
all of
too.
this, and thanks to Claudia and the people at the Hammer Museum. And they have the hammer, Forrest Bess and everything. It's really cute. You should go see Forrest Bess in there. He was aware that he was a male chauvinist pig, like all of us men. So he made a little incision down there to try to be female at the same time. And I don't think that's quite the way to do it, but you know, there's find your anima, you know, the Jungian thing, the female element in yourself is the better way than self-surgery with a fish knife. But his paintings are brilliant. They're very wonderful. You should all go see them. And I love Claudia, and we will stop. One more question, though. One more question.
I
Burning
don't know where
question.
the microphone is.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about engaging with your enemies. I really understand conceptually loving your enemies, but it's a whole different thing when there's a point of engagement and how to sort of negotiate that.
Okay, so I'll have the prop. How wonderful. Sometimes, like in the Buddhist psychology, there's a distinction that's made between motivation, which leads to action, and then the skillfulness of the action itself. So the motive or the intention behind an action, unlike in the West, in Eastern psychology is considered very, very important. So like I might reach down and pick up the book and hand it to one of you, and all anybody sees is my hand moving down and picking up an object and moving it forward. But why? You know, what's the heart space that's generating or sparking that action? Maybe I'm handing you the book because I like you and I want you to have it. Or maybe I'm handing you the book because I see you have another book and I think, well, hey, you know, maybe I'll give you this book and you'll give me that book. Or maybe I'm giving you the book because I don't like you. And I think, right in the beginning, you're going to see something in this book that's going to make you really miserable. And it's the same smile, right? And same gesture, but it's coming from a very, very different place. And so we say we use mindfulness to know our motives and really be clear about what we want in a conversation, in an encounter, in an action. And we also use practices, and they're actual practices of deepening loving kindness and compassion to transform our field of motivation. So if we have largely been coming from a place of fear, for example, and we do loving kindness meditation, we will find we are more and more coming from a place of connection in what we do or what we say. So that's the first thing. Distinct from that is the execution of the action. So the deepening of love or loving kindness may not determine what we'll do, it'll determine why we do it. And then in terms of what we do, it takes a kind of mindfulness in a different way, mindfulness of context, discernment, learning from our mistakes, trying again. All kinds of things might go into that point of engagement. Should we engage? Should we not engage? There's no one right answer and there's no formula, but I tend to emphasize over and over again, that's different than the motivation. Because so many people say, well, I don't know about that love thing, because then I could only say yes. Then I can only be sweet. Then I could only let them move in. Then I could, and it's not like that. We might genuinely be coming from a very loving place, but our best guess of the most appropriate, skillful thing to do in a certain context would be saying no, or not engaging, or being fierce, being very intense.
Tough
we
love,
don't know
fierce
that.
compassion.
Yeah, it's like tough love. So that's just an important understanding, I think, to give ourselves permission to see that kind of distinction.
And baby steps, baby steps.
Baby steps.
Just little by little. The
I
point
used
is,
to say beginning again. Now I'm going to say baby steps.
right. Your judgment is always better when you're cool, And so if it's running away, or if it's being tough, or it's being nice, or it's being whatever, you'll be more skillful at it, what you do. My wife is very good at it. When she criticizes me, she does it before I've really annoyed her, so that she's not really mad when she does it. And she has a little humor, and it's very rapier-like, and I get rattled. But if she's let it push her to the point of where she's really mad, then I react to the style and the heat of the mad, and I don't get the point. So when she can be rude ahead of time, she has a motto, actually. My son, I have a son, he makes nasty mottos for me and my wife, and everybody he knows. And he's kind of a wit, and he says, well, my dad's motto is, he says, why do it right when you can do it yourself? That's from my carpentry. But my wife's motto is, why be nice to them for a while only to have them get mad at you later when you can piss them off right away? And then run away, So there are all kinds of different things. We don't make any pious prescriptions. It's very key for women in America, I do feel, that they are socialized to be polite past a certain point, then they nuke that person, they nuke that boring male. And instead of that, if they act on their intuition and have more confidence in their intuition and act forcefully, happily, and joyfully and humorously, then that'll waste the male bullies, and it will make safer for them. And then they won't get mad. They won't need to get mad, which is only when they feel cornered and weak. That's one of the secrets. Is anger overtakes us when we feel cornered and weak. And it fools us into thinking it'll make us strong. But actually, it ruins the whole situation almost inevitably. It's like any addictive substance. We have to recognize that. And we try to help you do that here. So thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
Claudia. Goodbye. Thank you, Sharon, especially. Thank goodness I have a mindful person here.